Hi, I'm Randy Altman with Post Perspective. Welcome to Meet the Artist. Our first Meet the Artist is Andrea Chlebak from Harbor. She's senior colorist. Andrea, welcome.
Hi.
Thank you for doing this and taking the time. I know that you've got a lot going on, and that's something that we're going to talk about today is all the different projects that you're doing currently. But first, let's start at the beginning. How did you end up being a colorist? It's not as though that is, every kid in high school is like, wow, I want to be a colorist. So how did your path lead to this?
For sure. I mean, I think definitely in high school, I didn't really know that that was an option. Probably not until I got out of college, to be honest. I went to art school, Emily Carr University in Vancouver, Canada. And I went into school thinking I was going to go into photography. That was kind of my ultimate passion, my art form at the time. And found my way through into the film and video program, which was called integrated media, because we did sound design and kind of installation and performance art as well. So it kind of collected all of those people together into sort of one department, which was really fun for me. And I learned basically kind of the whole, obviously filmmaking process, but in sort of an art school form or format, should I say. So a lot more about creativity and process and sort of developing ideas versus, actual filmmaking. So sort of the more technical aspects were something I kind of learned myself along the way. When I graduated, of course, naturally, I as professionally became a photographer because, when you get out of college, it's not as easy to kind of get a break into the film industry. And I did not love working on set. It was not my preference, although I had directed short films and worked on the sets of my my fellow students. I wasn't really big on being on the set all day and directing and cinematography, even though that was kind of a natural progression from photography through film. So I started working as an editor, just kind of in whatever magnitude I could find. So I was working with other friends who had graduated, who were making films or working on music videos, and working as an editor or assistant editor, or basically whatever I could do that was in the post-production side. And I found my way into kind of a visual effects, what would it be like I'm losing my word for that, but it was like a program basically where you could do like a mentorship with a visual effects company, learn kind of on the boxes, because at the time that was not really accessible for just anybody to have, the VFX kit that you'd need to sort of work on lighting or 3D work. And so it was a mentorship program I was kind of applying for, and the visual effects producer at that facility looked at my reel and said, why wouldn't you be a colorist? It looks like that's what you should do. And it was at that time when I didn't really have any idea what that meant. So I was like, okay, cool, good to know. She's like, well, we'll put you, that mentorship program didn't happen that year. And it kind of stuck in the back of my mind that was a thing I could do, but I didn't really understand it. And a couple of years later, I found myself at a post-production company, sort of following my dream through post-production, where they were, primarily focused on video to film transfer, because at that moment in time, we were still mastering to film, and we were still having to submit independent films to festivals through film prints. And so a lot of the projects that company was working on was independent films, or big films that were shooting visual effects that needed film master of their movies. And so I kind of cut my teeth in the film lab area. I didn't work in the lab, but I worked kind of a lot with the lab, artists and timers, and learned all about color timing and that. And then that company shifted into a digital intermediate company, which is what we know, work now more as today. So they purchased sort of ARRI lasers and Baselight, and I kind of looked at that and said, that's where I want to be. And I lucked out that this leadership team at that company kind of recognized that even though I didn't have the experience, my personality and my sort of skill set matched that role. So I was able to kind of jump into being a junior colorist. We had brought in all of the different platforms to work on a Resolve, a Baselight, a Luster. I think at the time there was even a Pablo. I kind of got the science fair of color grading sets, you know, before I actually knew how to grade, which was kind of a funny part of my story. But during that time, I learned all of those from the manufacturers, or, you know, or the vendors themselves, and then got a chance to sort of jump in and worked with the senior colorist, actually taught them a little bit about how to use the Baselight, because that was the system that we purchased. And he unfortunately had to leave for another project, and we had a feature film on our plate to do. And my manager or leadership group said, "Hey, do you want to do it?" And I lucked out. It was my first feature was a film shot on Super 16, and the DP was David Moxness. And he basically, I always say my story is that I was taught to grade by a DP, because he kind of showed me all about, you know, I knew how to use the tool set. I understood, you know, what I needed to do, but how to do it, and sort of the pacing and what to look for and what to do and what not to do was really kind of what I learned from him in that first feature. And then from that, it kind of just took off. It was like one after the other. And that was it.
Well, it's an interesting path that you took. And I think that someone starting out as a colorist today would have benefited from sort of each and every step you took toward being a colorist. I mean, you sort of got in from the beginning, and you know how all of it works. And like you said, the perspective of a DP as well. So how would you say that helps you day to day in your work, having that kind of background?
I mean, it's kind of like invaluable. I mean, just having the language, understanding, you know, I find that working with a scope of DPs, you know, these days we're really very experienced, you know, people that are just like incredible for me to work with, as well as, you know, up and coming first feature. It's just really helpful, I think, for me to be able to have the language and understand like what I should or could do, and be able to sort of, you know, gauge, you know, what their process was. Like, I understand the process a lot, and of course every project I work on I learn more from everybody, but I think it really helps just to not to overstep into, you know, what is cinematography and what is color grading, and I think it really benefits just that relationship. It's easy for me to just kind of softly work alongside of what they do, and help them to sort of finalize their work in the best way possible, you know.
Well, let's talk a bit about projects. You have a pretty eclectic resume. You're not just pigeonholed in feature films or series or documentaries. Can you talk about some recent stuff, and then maybe we could dig a little bit deeper into one or two of the titles?
Yeah, I mean, so to kind of fill the full gamut, my recent, probably last 6 months to a year, involved a couple of sport-related documentaries. So a series about Naomi Osaka, which came out on Netflix, along with one that's about to come out called They Call Me Magic, which is Magic Johnson's story, which is a 4-part series, sorry. So that, you know, that's kind of originally where I kind of started out, to be honest, was in these sort of stylized documentary features. And so now they've become more series, because I think that's how people, you know, like to watch these stories and like get a little bit more out of them than just in one feature film. That to a video game project called Far Cry 6, which was something I've been a part of for the last sort of year and a half, that video game was in production. And that was a sort of, again, a different role, but it was sort of like color consultation, color grading within the game, to produce a kind of unique look for a video game at this point in time.
Do you know if that's a normal thing? Is that a new thing? Have you been asked to do anything like that before?
I know that it's come up, you know, just having spoken to, you know, other, when this project came to me in the early 2020, I remember trying to kind of ask around, like, has anybody done this? And I think it's relatively new. I mean, no, you know, jumping into that you know, it was already fully, you know, full swing production. Cinematics were being shot at the time for the game, and there was really nobody with this role. And I lucked out with the cinematics director, Grant Harvey, who I had worked with years ago, you know, over the years, I should say, as he was like a feature director and a series director. So we had spent a bit of time together in that world, and he made the jump kind of over into video game and was kind of like, we should have we should be, you know, collaborating. We should sort of like, you know, have this connective tissue, because a lot of the directives and goals visually for the game were to make it look more like cinema, or more like, you know, beautiful television series, you know, that you'd be immersed in. So my understanding is it's not very common for our role exactly to be there. I know there's a variety of art directors and creative directors that are kind of taking on the look and feel of video games for sure. But whether they're focused just on the color and that overall look and feel, I think it's a little bit, you know, new in terms of, at least from our side of the industry.
Video games, sports documentaries.
Yeah.
What about some series that you've worked on recently?
Right. So I am just about finishing, it should be finished. It's a series for Hulu called The Girl from Plainville, which has just premiered the first 3 episodes so far, but more are coming. And that's a 8-episode series, limited series, which is actually based on a true story. And it's kind of, I mean, it's very challenging and kind of haunting in terms of the look that we were working on for that series. And the sort of supervising DP was Frederick Elms, which is kind of amazing to have the chance to work with somebody like that at this point for me in my career. Just learned a lot from him, in just lighting and the kinds of things he would do with color to tell the story. And then secondary DP, Elijah Christian, and then Kat Westergaard. So 3 DPs on that feature, or sorry, that series, where it essentially tells the sort of true story of of something that was in the news a few years back about a girl and a boy who essentially met over text messaging, or met, but then had a relationship through text messaging, which sadly ended in his suicide. And then the sort of court story that followed that, with her having to serve a sentence for involuntary manslaughter. So again, like very sort of sensitive subject and careful work that I felt like we really needed to do in the color side to sort of really, you know, honor the stories from both sides. But it was really fascinating, to be honest, to work on something like that and be really, really conscious of what we were doing to the image, you know.
And something very different from that is Schmidty Dune.
Yeah, completely on the opposite side of the spectrum. Yeah, exactly. So Schmidty Dune, which is a series for Apple Plus, which was a super fun kind of a romp musical series that was very fun, very colorful, basically about a couple who goes on a hike to as part of a couples therapy group, and ends up in this magical musical land where everything is a musical, and that's kind of how they, you know, reconnect and re-find you know, each other in the process of these kind of ridiculous scenarios. But very fun project to work on. Again, totally opposite side of the spectrum.
So how would you describe the look of Schmidty Dune? And that brings us to a different point, which is, how do you like to be told what sort of, people use different words, and everybody has different meanings for a specific word. So how do you prefer to work? Do you want a lookbook? Do you want somebody to give you references of different films? What's the best way to get what you need?
Yeah, I mean, for us, I mean, I'm definitely, speaking for myself, very visual. I feel like most of us, you know, in this realm, cinematographers, directors, and colorists typically are really visual people. So I love to communicate with images. You know, people can talk, like you said, you have different language for things. Somebody might say something is dark when they mean it's low contrast. They might say it's desaturated when they mean it's cool. So really, you know, it's one of those things of like, you, through the process, you find your language in that particular project with the particular people. But when you first start up, I love just having this kind of conversation with images, to be honest. So lookbooks, whatever, you know, obviously they've done already a lot of work visually just to sort of like establish what they're going for. And so I always ask for as much of that as possible. And then usually, you know, I actually like to kind of contribute back and say, okay, what about this? Okay, that's interesting. What about this? And that way, it's kind of a way of me showing like, okay, this is how I've interpreted what you're giving me, and now what do you think about something? It's, you know, a reference image. It's not necessarily their image yet. It's, you know, another film or a painting or another piece of art or a photograph. It's like, how about this as an inspiration? Oh, that's interesting. Let's talk about this. And then we sort of like developed a language based on those key images, which is nice because it's like you're looking at the same thing, and that way I can start to sort of almost translate or use, you know, hear the words that somebody would use to describe that image that I've put forward, and then start to realize what, you know, what's our language going to be for this project, and what are they sensitive to and what aren't they sensitive to, that, you know, maybe in another project, you know, I was obsessed about because of, you know, that scenario. So it's really, to me, it's all about just like as many visuals as possible up front, so that we can really develop that language properly.
How often do you get involved early, and does that include creating a LUT for them to use on set?
I would say more and more now, you know, probably 80% of the work that I do is right at the very, not ground floor, but really, really at the beginning. So before anybody's off to shoot camera tests, or they're even when they're deciding on which cameras to shoot with, or especially lenses, getting in with the camera test and the lens test, and talking with the DP about, and the director potentially, about what the visual, you know, goals are, even having a chance to look at costume or set design, things like that that are already in play. I find really help me to sort of contribute. You know, the more I see, the more I can say, what about this? What about this? Is this the right color? You know, that's how this should look. And then I try to offer, you know, a kind of a range or a scope of looks at that moment in time, so that it's almost like providing this, it's a collaboration between me and the DP and the director often, but then also just so that they have a sort of a toolkit from me that we can talk about. Do you like this look, that look? Well, when I was shooting over here, I actually chose that LUT, and that really worked really well here, but it didn't work as well over here. So maybe we could make a tweak, and, you know, so I'm usually pre-develop something for them. They test it, we do a little tweak, and then along the way, I'm sort of there just as, you know, as support if there's anything that comes up or they need something. Usually on series, because they're sort of longer drawn out processes, and you have, you know, a second or third DP come on board. Usually it's just every time somebody new sort of joins the group, there's a little tweak to be made, and it's really nice to be able to do that and be there for that process, so that when it comes time to finish it, you kind of know what's been put in, and everybody's sort of flavor almost.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, that's kind of the difference between series and features, is that in a feature, you might develop that and they would use that thing the whole way. Depending on how many, of course, days they have to shoot. But if they have a very long shoot, sometimes you'll make some alterations or corrections. But for the most part, you're kind of locking and loading and doing a little bit more work at the beginning, whereas a feature has a little bit more time, or a series has more time to, you know, evolve through that look.
But in terms of having them use a LUT on set, that helps the process. When it comes back to you, how big of a deal is that in terms of workflow?
Yeah, I mean, it's really helpful. I mean, obviously, if there's like dailies or on-set color work, they are doing that within that LUT, so that all of that work is meaningful. You know, it comes back and can be utilized as sort of a starting point for me. And I can, you know, I bring it all in, and it looks exactly like how everybody left it. Sometimes that's good, and sometimes it's not ideal. Sometimes they want to make a change right away. That's great. It's just metadata. It's just there, and we can turn it off. But I find it really helpful for me to, you know, just kind of, okay, now we're in final color, we're in finishing resolution, we have all the possible, you know, detail and pixels possible here. Now where do we want to go? This is where everybody's been looking at so far. So if they've been staring at the dailies for months or a year or whatever, at least it starts them in that place where they left off to them. For me, you know, it just helps me to kind of keep in with the process and not necessarily control it, but just be aware that I can manage the color. And from our side, because we develop the LUTs, we have a color management team, you know, it allows us to sort of know what's going into everything. So if there's any issues along the way, or as we're grading, technically we know what we put into it. So we can go and tweak those things, you know, which is just huge help, because we just don't have to worry about, you know, some random thing that's gonna hit us along the way that we're gonna have to pivot and figure out a solution to, which I find is, you know, was super common for me in the past. So it's nice to have a lot of, you know, again, more control, more just awareness of what's kind of gone into making the image, so that when we're going to sort of alter it or enhance it going out, we kind of have all of the ingredients and we know what to do, if that makes sense.
Sure. And you mentioned with series, there's multiple DPs, but on films, there is just the one. So you've worked on Deepwater, right, which just came out with Adrian Lynn. Can you talk a little bit about that process? And this was sort of his first foray into digital grading. Is that true?
That's true. Yeah. I mean, I did not know that or think about that as we first started working together. But like within the first day, learned very quickly that, the last time he had kind of done color was color timing, in a film lab. And it would have been obviously a number of years ago. So it was really kind of fun we almost said that this might be the last time you're going to be working with somebody that's never done this before, and it was really fun to kind of reintroduce the process again. For me, who's been obviously working in it since 2007, it was to me like a little enlightening of like, oh yeah, this is kind of how far this technology has come and the process has come. And also to become, again, like back to the beginning of my sort of story with the DP, is like to become aware of the kind of work that we do and what we do to alter the image. Because as working with Adrian, he and I had this process of, again, developing a language, talking about printer lights. So then translating that for me back into sort of the more digital realm, which we can do, but I don't necessarily work that way. So it was just kind of a fun way of like, okay, yeah, we're gonna kind of jump into this process, kind of almost like it was back at the beginning for me, but now I know a lot more. And so, and also just really interesting in the kinds of things that a filmmaker like Adrian would want to do, or would want to change or not change, but about an image. Really it kind of got me back kind of to the roots of filmmaking a little bit, which I thought was really just interesting and helpful. And having the DP as well in that, Ivor Brild, who obviously with a wealth of experience, and he and I share our love for the darkness. He called me the Queen of Darkness throughout the process, which I love that nickname now. But because I'm not afraid to like allow an image to be dark for mystery and for storytelling. And I think that that is very much like the kind of filmmaking that Adrian, was doing, in the past with if you just look at like Fatal Attraction, or you look at 9.5 Weeks, or name all these amazing films that are thrillers and create this sense of tension without visual effects, like a great deal of visual effects. And to me, that was like just even kind of going back through his body of work and then working with Igel and Adrian, it was just really fun and kind of enlightening for me to kind of put my head in the space of, okay, for at least on Adrian's side, was not as aware of the wealth of tools that we had, and when it made sense to bring up those as sort of a solution, not necessarily like let's throw everything at it. Let's kind of work through the image. And one of the most interesting things to me that I sort of kept going forward on that film was that they didn't really want it to be. Sometimes you work on a feature and you return to the same location. For example, in this particular film, the house was like almost like a character in this film, and so you return to certain areas of the house many times. And I've worked on films where the DP will want that to look the same. So let's go back to reel one and see what that looked like then, and let's make that look the same as it does in 4 days later or 3 days later or whatever, and that's a style. Like you can definitely approach color that way, where you want these things to match because you need the consistency, because you want the audience to be like, oh yes, we're here again, this is the same thing. And from their perspective, they wanted that to change every single time. So there was no kind of, the finessing was very different. It wasn't like, let's go and look at these two things. It was like, we're not there now. Like, why would we, this is a different time. There's a different emotional headspace. We're going to make this totally different. So you'd have a scene in a hallway in the daytime that would be neutral and bright. And then later in the movie, it would be like green and, and sort of cavernous. And that was just really fun to sort of go through that process of not matching, that in fact, like the sort of looseness of the color was part of what made it feel unique and interesting. And for them as a storytelling, method, it was just nice to be part of that, from that perspective, and not feel like, oh, these have to be exactly the same. It was a different headspace. It was like, oh, what should this feel like? And what's the emotion of the scene? And I think that because we have all of these tools, we sometimes, us, me included, we can get caught up in what we can do. And it was just a very good sort of refresher on, we don't have to do anything, this is naturally, it feels like this, and we don't want it to be too dialed, because it will just feel too manipulated. We want it to feel just like loose and sort of sexy and sort of soft. And that was definitely like a lot of the sort of words that were used to try to just get the feeling of that movie to work across the whole thing. So
did you work on that during the pandemic?
Yes. Yeah. So most of my work with that film was remote. I don't think I actually had, no, I never had anybody. At some points, Igel was in Denmark and Adrian was in New York and I was in Los Angeles. So we had a number of remote sessions where we were in different time zones and never really worked together in the same room. We all had theatrical experiences. Or sometimes on the iPad, we had iPads for the DP when he was, off in different places, but the whole thing was, during I think they shot it in 2019. So it would have been actually a little bit delayed in post-production, and we would have worked on it in 2021.
How is it working like that remotely? And do you expect that to remain in some aspects in terms of people not being in the room with you?
Yeah, I mean, it can be challenging. I know that the more we talk about it, the more that DPs, especially now that they can come back into the room, they want to do it. And I find that it's just those subtleties of just people having a reaction beside you or in front of you or what have you. You kind of just get a little bit more, so you can. It's sort of more collaborative and more back and forth. I find that with the remote experience, while it's extreme, it's amazing. Sometimes you be with everybody, like I said, in different parts of the world, we're all looking at images and we're all talking and collaborating. I think that aspect of things, I don't think is going to change. I think the fact is for many years, we'd lose a DP on a show from the color grading perspective because they would be off shooting another film. And now with the sort of way that remote can be set up, they can even, this happened just recently where I started with somebody in the room and then they had to go off and shoot something and they were able to just kind of like log in and just check in and do an hour of a stream. And I don't think that's going to go away. I think that part, which is a major benefit, which allows a cinematographer or a director to be anywhere in the world and to sort of still check in on their film or their episode. I think that is like huge change that we were doing a little bit before, but now it's going to just be sort of like, oh, is that person available? Let's get them an iPad and they can immediately kind of jump in. And even for me, like I have a work from home setup, which I love the opportunity to have that. Just again, sometimes it's just really handy to be at different times of the day or offset different people or utilize space differently, but to be able to just kind of like, oh, I feel like I have an idea right now and I'm going to go do a little bit of that work, even though it might be 9 o'clock at night. That can be really convenient. And also, when we have everybody remote, there's no reason for me to go in necessarily. I can just run it from home and everybody's, in Hawaii or Vancouver or wherever. It just makes more sense for us all to sort of be in our own space. So I think I think there's going to be an element that's hybrid that's going to just stay because it's just so convenient for post companies, for, colorists to have that flexibility. We work long hours. It's nice to be able to have, I'm going to go home and do the rest of it at home. I don't necessarily need to be supervised or we're not together. I can do some of this work at home. I think that's going to stick. I hope it's going to stick, to be honest. I think that part is that's sort of, it's kind of enhanced the process a little bit. But I do think that what it has lacked is just that sort of little, there's no words for it, where you're just together and you can bounce an idea off each other, or you can show them something and you hear them react and you can kind of go further in that direction or away from it quickly before it, there's a delay in the response, like thinking about it. It's less sort of heady, it's more intuitive. And I definitely found myself missing that kind of social interaction and experience as part of what I do. So I like the going back, to be honest. I just feel like everybody in the same room looking at the same thing is great. But I think that there are so many benefits now of just being able to be remote and be able to, use the technology that we have to allow more people to be in the process when needed. I think that's really, to me, the key for wherever they need to be, in their careers. So.
Well, I'm going to let you get back to it soon, but before we leave, can we talk about, it's a very male-dominated industry that we work in, right? How do you see getting more females interested in working as editors, colorists, VFX artists, hands-on, not just producers type of thing, that too, but how do you get them into the more technical roles?
I do think it has to do a little bit with, a director said this to me recently. It's like, you have to be the one that go, and I think there is a group of colorists, myself included now, but there was many before me, who kind of paved the way a little bit for that. And I do think that, like, to be honest, a little bit of extra effort I've been kind of working on these ideas for many years now, just in like, how did I get to where I was? And a lot of it came from being graced with people that did not have a problem with a woman being in that role, to be honest, or who encouraged it, to be honest. And it was like, oh yeah, we should really, there's like nobody in the room in our office that's a woman that's doing any of these roles. Like, maybe, we should do that. And I think I benefited from that. And I feel like having just that extra effort from the sort of senior position to look at, backwards, I shouldn't say down, but say, okay, who's coming behind me, and like, let's give a little bit of an extra push. And it does, and it's a difficult discussion to always have, because sometimes, there's, for a variety of reasons, certain people, succeed or grow more quickly. And I think, what I've kind of come to terms with, is just give extra sort of effort towards women, and just having more time to basically say, like, what do you want to do? And have a little bit more of that mentorship time with people. I think also it just has to be more accepted, and more people. At Harbor, we have actually a huge female group. We have, a vault manager, and we have, producers, and we have color assists and editors. And so I think just that sort of environment allows for more people to recognize, oh, I could do that too. And I think us as facilities, as productions, just building the environment where it's just that is the norm, I think the extra effort has to be made. And I've seen a lot of productions, even, they come at us from post wanting, female colorists, and there isn't a lot of options, but at the same time, like, there is options. And I think that it has to be that just extra effort. And I've often heard, to be honest, I've heard, the discussion about, whether it's more, with women, is it more of a risk because they have less experience? If you just put a female colorist or a female DP up against a similarly, experienced male DP, you will look at their experience level, and it, without knowing their gender, it's very obvious, like, who might just get chosen out of experience. And I think that we have to make just the effort, like, we have to be taking the risks, which is not a risk, but I think that we have to be allowing people who are not normally in these positions to hold them. And also, when they are in the positions and they might be struggling, to help to mentor them or help give them a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt, because they don't come from the place where they can just kind of land in the job. And I think that, to me, it really has to come from, I hate to say the top down, but it has to come from the people making the decisions of who gets to be in what roles, to be honest, and then those people to follow through with actually supporting them. Because you can put somebody in the role and give them no support, and that will ultimately fail. And I think that I benefited from being allowed to step into the role, but then supported almost the entire way. I won't say the entire way, but most of the way. And I think that that allows you the momentum to sort of learn and keep being part of the, I have a seat at the table. When you start to feel like you don't have a seat at the table, I think that's when people retreat and say, I don't really want to, it's not really worth it. And I have a child too. I mean, it's one of those things where I think that's just very common for, especially for DPs, women DPs who go and, shoot and then like, I want to have a family. It's not easy to just pick up and go on, leave for 6 months to go shoot a film or a series without taking your kids or being there. And I think that has challenged a lot of women in our industry for sure. So, I think it's about figuring out what your balance is, but also, people just making that extra effort, to be honest, I think is a big part of what will change it.
I agree. Well, people could look at your work on the Harbor site. I encourage people to go there. Thank you for taking the time. And before you go, what's next on your plate? If you could mention a title.
Can I mention a title? Yeah, I'm finishing up The Girl from Plainville. I am going to take a wee vacation, and then I'm going to pick up with a Netflix feature called Happiness for Beginners.
Very, very cool. Andrea, thanks so much for taking the time. I appreciate it. Really great to chat with you, and hopefully we'll see you soon.